Well, hello there, lifetime webinar members. It's Jen Bengal, and I'm excited to bring you this webinar all about reading fluency. Give me 1 second to move my screen around a little bit. Here we go. There we are. And we can dive right into the webinar. Let me tell you too that there is a workbook for you that you can download and print off if you have not done that as we go through the content. You can take notes. As with all of the lifetime webinars, you can pause the recording. You can watch it over and over again. So if you want to pause and take notes, you can do that. You can also download all of my notes if you want to do that afterwards and compare what you have written down. That's something that might be helpful for you. Or you can just cheat a little and grab all the notes now. It's up to you. So all of these are in the lifetime webinar access for this section and this webinar all about reading fluency. You also have these handouts that I've created specifically for this webinar. They're not available anywhere else, so you have access to these. You can print these off. They're very cool checklists for you. We're going to be going over what these are and exactly how I use them when we get into the content of the webinar. So is this you? Do you have students who struggle with fluency and you're not sure how you can help them? You've noticed that they're struggling with reading fluency and you can say, this student definitely has a fluency problem, but I don't really know what to do now. If that's you, then this webinar is going to be really helpful. Maybe you wonder what reading with fluency really looks like or what it really sounds like. What should it look like? What should it sound like? We're going to go over all of that information. If you're wondering about those kids who are reading silently and you're thinking, I'm not sure if they're really being fluent readers inside of their minds as they're reading, that's something we're going to talk about too, because reading with fluency isn't just about oral reading, it's about silent reading as well. And how can we check for that? We're going to be talking about that. And if you're looking for strategies to help struggling readers with reading fluency, we're going to be talking about that today too. Here's what we're going to discover. First, we're going to talk about why we should focus on reading fluency. Now, if you know me at all, which you probably do because you're a lifetime member, you know that I like to talk about the reasons behind why we do things. So we'll go over why we should be focusing on reading fluency. And then there is a big myth attached to reading fluency that I am going to correct for us today. This happens a lot of times with our thoughts about reading fluency, and we're going to talk about this big myth and we're going to correct it. And then we're going to talk about the 6 main characteristics of fluent reading. There are 6 kind of strategies that we break down for fluent reading. We're going to do that today, and that will be really helpful for you to think about the idea of fluency, not in just this big island, but in smaller terms in these 6 characteristics. We're also going to talk about characteristics of students who struggle with oral reading fluency, what to notice, what are the things you can look for if they're struggling with oral reading fluency, and also what are the things that you can pay attention to and what can you notice if they're struggling with silent reading fluency. So if you're wondering if they're having a fluency problem during silent reading and you're not sure how to tell, we're going to go over those today. And then we'll also share 11 strategies to help you increase reading fluency in your students. Let's start by talking about reasons that we should be teaching fluency. I have 7 reasons for you that go over why we should be teaching reading fluency. Now, I'm going to burn through these pretty quickly because I think we all can agree that it's important to be teaching reading fluency. The first reason is we want the students to be able to increase their reading automaticity. This means reading on the fly, not having to stop and decode words and figure things out, but just being able to solve it on the fly automatically, to be able to move and move and move. And when we teach fluency directly, we can help students improve their automaticity. We can also help them improve their ability to decode words. Direct fluency instruction will improve students' ability to decode words, and then they'll be able to attend to the meaning in the text. Focusing on meanings in the text is our third reason for teaching fluency. Students who read with fluency can focus on the meaning of the text. They're able to put parts of a text together and comprehend it because they're not having to spend so much time worrying about decoding and wondering about fluency. Another great reason is it builds reading stamina. This really helps build reading stamina as students improve their abilities to read larger amounts of text at one time. So when they're not struggling with fluency and decoding and doing all of those types of things, they can read for longer periods of time and it improves their stamina, which we all want them to be able to do. It also will expand their vocabulary knowledge. Students can expand their knowledge and think about the multiple meanings of words within a text when they're not busy thinking about what the word sounds out and means. So they can attend to different meanings of vocabulary words in the text much easier when they're reading with fluency, and direct fluency instruction will help with this. They will also retain more information. So students who have experience practicing reading fluency, they can retain more information about what they're actually reading. And the last big reason is accuracy and rate improves. Reading accuracy and rate will improve while the need to stop and decode will fade away in your readers. So these are all really great reasons that we should be teaching reading fluency. Let's start talking about this big myth I mentioned before. So many teachers, they associate reading fluency with speed. It's often measured by calculating the number of words read in 1 minute, which gives us a reading rate. And then the reading rate we calculate, and voila, we have this new norm that's born. It means reading with fluency equals reading with speed or reading fast. So this is kind of the idea that a lot of people think of when they think of reading with fluency. They think of reading fast because we're timing them. So the result is fluency instruction really becomes a quest for speed. And we have all these things that are timing our kids to read faster and faster and faster, and they think that that's what fluency is. But reading with fluency is so much more than just simply reading fast. Before I dive more into that, let's think about another problem. Another problem that often comes up is older students are often doing more silent reading than they are doing oral reading. So by the time they get to the middle of second grade, third grade, fourth grade, fifth grade, and up, they're spending more time reading silently than they are reading out loud. This is a problem because many teachers don't see a need to teach reading fluency past second grade because they think, well, my students are reading silently, they've got this covered. My kids don't need help with fluency anymore. But the truth of the matter is that they do. So fluency is actually reading with and for meaning in both silent and oral reading. So it's not just about oral reading, it's also about silent reading too. And it's not about how fast we read, it's about reading for meaning. And that is the big idea with fluency. So the big idea is when your students are struggling with fluency, it really means that they're struggling with comprehension. If you think your students have a fluency issue, it's more than likely that it's really a comprehension issue. Because if they're having trouble decoding words, they're having trouble understanding them in context, they're having trouble understanding what those words mean within the passage or within the story, and that's a comprehension issue. So a lot of people think, oh, my kids are great with comprehension, they're just struggling with fluency. And whenever I'm working with a teacher and I hear a teacher say, my kids are struggling with fluency, I always think, they're probably struggling with comprehension. And here's another thing to think about too. Kids have a limited amount of brain power while they're reading. If they have to spend a lot of time decoding words, then they cannot attend to the meaning of the text. So they only have this certain amount of brain power. If they have to spend a lot of it decoding words, they're not going to be able to understand the text as much as if they were just reading with automaticity. So how can we help? We do not focus on reading words just correctly. We also have to focus on helping kids read words more automatically with that automaticity. So our big goal is for readers to read words and phrases correctly and automatically so that they can use that limited brain power that they have for the comprehension, for the meaning of the text. So many readers struggle with comprehension, not because they don't have enough brain power, but because they're using most of it for fluency and word recognition, and there's not much left for comprehension. So these readers are the types of kids who would likely understand and comprehend the majority of the same text if it was read to them. So if the class was being read to, that's why read alouds are so great. These kids wouldn't have to worry about the fluency and they can use all of that brain power that they have just like everybody else to attend to the entire meaning of the text. So the big question here is how can we build students word recognition to automaticity so that they can focus most of their limited brain power on comprehension and not decoding and fluency? This is a big question. There's 6 main characteristics of fluent reading that we're going to go over, and we're going to talk about these a little bit and give some examples. So in my notes, I have these for you. These are all typed out, but you can also take your own notes and write your own thinking down in your blank workbooks too. The first characteristic of fluent reading is pausing. This is noticing punctuation for meaning. Now remember, fluency is really about meaning. So if they are not pausing in the correct spots, that means they're not thinking about the meaning of the text there. Yes, it's a fluency issue, but it's ultimately tied back to that meaning component, that comprehension. So you might do a lesson with some language like this, and you could do a whole group tier 1 mini lesson on the idea of pausing and use this as an example. You might say something like, boys and girls, you may have heard teachers say you need to read with fluency, and you may think reading with fluency means you have to read as fast as you can, but that's not really true. When readers read with fluency, it means they are thinking very carefully about the words and how they go together to make sense in the text they are reading. So when we read with fluency, we're really reading to understand. We're really reading for meaning. Today, I want to talk about how readers use commas to help them read fluently. When we see a comma, we stop, take a breath, pause, and then we keep reading. And you can use a book that you've read to your class, a mentor text, as an example of how you can stop and pause and read with commas. And you can do this in the class a couple of times. You can show this on an overhead. You can print copies of a passage off with commas. You can do some shared reading together and model this and talk about how that comma helped you understand the text a little bit more as you were reading together. The second characteristic of reading with fluency is phrases. So we have first off, we have pausing, and then we have phrases. Phrases is when you're reading groups of words together based on meaning. So again, it all ties back to the meaning. You're going to read certain phrases together in a way that makes sense. If kids are reading phrases in chunks that don't seem to go together comprehension-wise, that's a fluency problem, but it's also a meaning comprehension problem. They're not understanding how these phrases work together. And again, you can use some language like this where it kind of starts out the same way, talking about how you might think reading with fluency means you're reading as fast as you can, but that's not really true. When we read with fluency, we're reading to understand, we're reading for meaning. And then you can say, today I want to talk about how readers chunk phrases of words together to help them read fluently and understand the text. When we read words in phrases and not just one word at a time, we can think more deeply about the meaning. Let's practice this together. And then you can take a mentor text that you've already read to the class and practice reading it wrong. Practice reading it one word at a time, or practice reading it where the phrases don't seem to go together, and see if you can talk about how that changes the meaning of the text as you read it that way. And then go ahead and read it the correct way with good phrasing and talk about how the meaning of that text changed based on how you read it in a correct phrase and not one word at a time or with inaccurate phrases chunked together. So you can do a lesson like that and then have the kids practice that. This is direct fluency instruction for them. The third characteristic of fluency is called stress. This is when you're stressing certain words to convey meaning. A lot of times when we're reading a book to our kids, we do this, we don't even realize it. We make a big emphasis on one word, and then that becomes a word that adds meaning. It's a more important word. We know it's more important because we're stressing that word as we're reading it. Some language for a lesson on stress might be, today we're going to talk about one key idea from reading with fluency that you probably have already done and you just didn't realize it. It's called reading with stress. Reading with stress means that as you read, you put extra stress on the keywords that you do, more extra stress on keywords than you do while reading all the other words in the text. You may stress one word or an entire phrase. You'll know readers are stressing a word because their voice will get louder, or maybe they will drag that one word out. Let's think about what it really means to read with stress and what kinds of words we should be stressing as we read aloud or silently today. And then again, grab a mentor text that you've already read with the class, pick a few words that you want to stress, model that out loud for them as you read a section of it. Talk about how that word was more important, why you think you stress that word or that phrase over the rest of the conversation in the text, and just talk about how it affected the meaning and how different it would be if you didn't stress any words that you were reading. Really just bringing to the students' attention these kinds of direct fluency skills is super important to help them practice it on their own, bringing them aware to it. The fourth characteristic is called intonation. This is the rise and fall or the loudness or softness of your voice that you will read to reflect meaning. Now, this isn't just oral. A lot of this is oral when you're reading out loud, but thinking about how your voice might rise or fall when you're reading silently is another trait of fluency too. You might use this kind of language for the lesson. Today, we're going to talk about one key idea from reading with fluency that you probably have already done and just didn't realize it. It's called reading with intonation. Reading with intonation means that as you read, you make your voice louder on more important words and phrases. It also means making your voice lower or softer on different words or phrases. It's important to read out loud with intonation so that the reading doesn't sound more like reading all at the same voice level. Your listeners will know the more important words or phrases because you will read them louder or softer than all the rest of the words. Let's think about what it really means to read with intonation and what kinds of words we should be reading louder as we read aloud today. And again, now you'll model this. You'll be reading words louder. You'll be reading words softer. You can put these on your anchor chart. You can think about what it sounds like when we read words louder and softer, how that changes the comprehension and all that good stuff too. The fifth characteristic is rate. This is reading to help the listener understand the text. So you're reading not too fast, not too slow, kind of like Goldilocks and the Three Bears, right? You want to get it the just right reading rate. So rate really impacts the meaning of the text as well. So today we're going to talk about one key idea from reading with fluency that you probably have already done and you just didn't realize it. It's called reading with a good rate. Reading with a rate means that as you read, you change the speed in which you read a text either out loud or silently. You may read some words faster in one part of the text and slow way down in other parts. Readers read with a different rate so they can keep the reading interesting and think more deeply about the meaning of the text. Let's think some more about rate today and practice. And then you can practice with the class, reading certain parts of a mentor text faster and some parts slower, maybe when it gets more intense or more scary or more emotional in a certain spot, you'll slow down your rate. And then if something is happening that's really exciting in the story, you'll speed up your rate and read it a little bit more quickly like that. So you'll talk about how that rate impacts the meaning then as well. And the last characteristic, and all of this language, by the way, that I have, I think I already mentioned, but it's in your notes. So you can use these little scripted kind of guides to help you get started in teaching fluency with your kids with these 6 characteristics. The last one is integration, basically putting it all together to understand the text in a way that adds meaning. So some language you might use for a lesson on integration is, when we think about reading with fluency, there are lots of things to consider. We need to pay attention to our rate and our tone when we read. We can think about how our voice sounds in comparison to how fast we're reading, and the way we sound and the speed in which we read all impact the meaning of the text. Let's practice reading and think carefully about our speed and our tone. We'll talk about how we did with fluency after we read. Now you can do a couple things here. You can model this for the class and show it done the right way, show it done the poorly, put it all together. How is my rate? How is my tone? How is my stress? How is all of that going together? And then you can have the kids practice with partners, and they can be reading together with a partner right there in your whole group, and then talk about how your partner did with reading and how their fluency sounded. And you can also do this in little groups too. So you can talk about fluency and integration and putting it all together here with this last characteristic. So these are all great types of teacher language that you can use. And all you need is some mentor text that you've already read to your class, and you can start really talking specifically about these characteristics of fluency with your class. And remind them that it's not just for silent or oral reading. It's also reading fluently also includes when you're reading silently during independent reading time, especially. Studies have shown that students who typically read aloud with expression have a high comprehension rate during their silent reading. So one way to tell if your students are really doing good with silent reading is, how are they sounding when they're reading out loud to you? So say you have them in a guided reading group or they're reading something out loud in front of the whole class. Are they reading with good fluency and expression? If they are, chances are when they're reading silently, they have a nice high comprehension rate too. Lots of other studies have shown that those who read with a monotone way orally, so if they're reading out loud and they are reading one word at a time like this, they probably have poor comprehension during their silent reading, because remember, they have limited brain capacity, and if they're spending a lot of their brain capacity paying attention to each individual word in isolation as they're reading. They're not reading with automaticity, and they're spending a lot of brain power trying to decode and read each word as they go. So they're probably going to be struggling with their silent reading and with their comprehension. So the big question is, how can we tell if students are struggling with fluency, and what can we do about it? So I have some signs for you. These are 10 signs that students are struggling with oral reading fluency. And you have these as handouts in your section here for the webinar. So if your student is struggling with oral reading fluency, they're probably struggling to read words automatically. They don't get the words really fast. They get hung up on new words for too long when they're struggling with fluency during oral reading. So they might take way too long trying to figure out a word. That's a sign that they're struggling. Or they keep reading on after they make an error that affects the meaning or the syntax, which is the sentence structure of the text. So if they just keep right on reading and they don't notice that they made this error that affects the meaning, then that's a sign they're struggling with fluency too. Or they skim or read over helpful information, like they completely miss that that was a really helpful piece of information. They skim right over it. They do not notice when oral reading stops making sense. They forget most of the important information in the text. So after reading, if you talk to them, tell me what you just read, tell me what you remember, and they really can't give you much information there, chances are, again, they're spending so much brain power trying to decode the words that they can't attend to the meaning of the text there. So they're really struggling. Or they read choppy and they have awkward pauses. If they read in a flat, monotone voice, that's a sign that they're struggling with fluency as well. And if they read the whole text at the same speed, that's a sign that they're struggling. Or it might be a sign that they think reading fluency means they have to read as fast as they can. And it might just be a simple matter of you having to say, hey, let's do some talking and conversation about what reading fluency really means, because it doesn't mean reading as fast as you can. It means something totally different. And you might have to just do a quick lesson on that, and they could totally get it. That has happened to me in the past multiple times. And then there's times where I'll have that conversation and we'll do that lesson, and they still are struggling with reading at the same rate, and that's a different story. But sometimes they just don't understand the definition of reading with fluency. They think it's something different. So they're trying to perform in a way for you that they think they're doing a good job at, but actually they're doing it completely wrong. And the last one I have here is they repeat words and phrases frequently. So they have a lot of repetition in the words that they're reading and their phrases. They're going back and rereading and rereading and repeating. Even if the word is correct, they just keep repeating it. It's kind of a way for our brain to pause. And as we're trying to figure out the next word or the next phrase, we're repeating the words that we just previously read to kind of buy our time. If you've ever had someone ask you a question and you repeat the question just naturally because your brain needs just a little bit of a minute to figure out what you're going to say as an answer, and that's kind of like a pause technique that we use and we don't even realize it. So if they're constantly repeating, it's a sign that they're having to go back and decode a lot of time. And again, that's a fluency struggle that's going to impact their meaning. Now there's some signs to look for when they're reading silently. Now this can be a little bit more tricky because you can't orally hear what they're saying. So you have to look for things a little bit more discreetly if they're struggling with silent reading. Now sometimes just paying attention to your kids while they're doing independent reading, just watching them. When they don't know that you're watching them, just take a minute and just watch and see what they do and look for these 10 signs. If they're struggling with, I would say, if you answer yes to 4 or more of these, then they're likely struggling with silent reading fluency. Do they look around the room or at all the other parts of the book? So are they scanning through the other parts of the book that you see them reading? And if that's something that they're doing, they're probably struggling there. Do they move their eyes up and down or back and forth in an unnatural way? So it doesn't appear that they're actually reading. Their eyes are kind of just going up and down the page or the opposite direction of reading. That's a sign that they're definitely struggling. So you got to really look for that. Do they take significantly more time to read and process the text than what you expected? So say you're in a guided reading group and you give them a few pages to read in 10 minutes and you notice that they haven't even finished that section that you expected them to be able to read in that time period. If they're not finishing that in a certain amount of time period that you expected, that can be a big sign too. If they struggle remembering any of the language from the text or any of the dialogue from the text after reading, they can't recall what happened in the story or what a character said, those are definitely signs that they're struggling with fluency because they're not having really strong meaning attached to what they just read. If they struggle to find evidence in the text to support a conversation after reading, that's a sign that they're struggling as well. If they answer basic comprehension questions wrong after reading, like they don't remember who the main character was, or they make up an event, or the event didn't even happen, or it's incorrectly retold, those are signs that they're struggling with fluency because they are really having to spend so much time decoding that they can't think about the comprehension as much in the text. If they seem unable to retain information from the text over several days. So, say they could tell you what happened immediately after reading, but the next day they don't remember anything about the book that they just read, or 2 days later, you say you're in a reading conference with them and they don't remember the story at all, but they knew it that day, that can be a sign that they're struggling with fluency. If they confuse vocabulary words and their meanings, another big sign there because they're not attending to the meanings of the words in the text. If they miss the main ideas and they give you inaccurate details after reading, another big sign. So if you say yes to 4 or more of these when you're thinking about a specific student and you're on the fence, are they struggling with silent reading here or not? Pay attention, notice these things. If you have a yes to 4 or more, you're going to be needing to do some more fluency instruction and modeling for them for sure. Okay, so signs that the students are strong with oral reading fluency. This is going to tell you, you know what, are these kids ready for the next level of challenging text? If you answer yes to 6 or more of these questions, then try moving them to a more challenging text and see how they do. So does the student recognize words quickly and automatically while reading out loud? Are they quick and they ready to go? Do they solve new words on the run while they're reading? So that automaticity factor, is it on the run? Can they self-monitor often for accuracy and syntax, which means sentence structure? So if they notice they read a word that was supposed to be plural, they read it singular and it didn't make sense and they went back and made it plural, that's great that they're doing that. Are they monitoring that? Do they search for and use information from the text to read words automatically? So are they quickly scanning over the sentence or the few phrases before to make sure that that word is that's new to them, that they're reading it accurately? Do they stop and reread correctly when meaning is lost? Do they remember almost all the important parts after reading? And not just that day, but the next day and the next day? And do they sustain a smooth momentum during reading with no awkward pauses? So are they reading with a good momentum? Is it kind of flowing? Do they read with the expression to reflect the meaning? Are they adjusting their speed to reflect the meaning in the parts of the text that need to be adjusted? And have they really little need to be rereading? So they're not doing a lot of rereading at all. These are all great signs that they're doing a good job with reading fluency, which likely means their comprehension is going to improve because they're reading at a more fluent and automatic rate, allowing for their brain to spend more time focusing on the comprehension, which is what we want. We want them to be reading for meaning. So there's 6 signs that they're strong with silent reading fluency. So with silent reading fluency, watch for these things and you'll know that they're doing really good. Do they track the print with their eyes in a way that seems natural to reading? So watch their eyes as they're reading silently. Are they moving across the page in a way that seems to be accurate, not only in the direction that the eyes are moving, but in the speed at which they're moving? So the second one, do they move their eyes smoothly over the print? Not too fast where it's obvious that they're skimming, and not too slow where it appears that they're struggling to read words automatically, but in a more natural way. Really watch their eyes. Do they process the text in an appropriate amount of time? So if you give them 10 minutes in guided reading to finish the text and they finish it in that amount of time, that's an appropriate sign that they're really doing good. Do they talk about the language from the text and the way it was memorable and stood out after reading? So are they talking about what was said in the text after they're done reading? Do they recall lots of dialogue and what the characters said while they were reading silently? So can they go back and say, "Oh my gosh, it was so funny when Sam in the story told Molly this or that"? And do they go back and talk about those kinds of things? Can they easily reference the text and find evidence to support facts and opinions during reading? So if they answered yes to all of these, then they are doing really good with their silent reading fluency. So all of these checklists, feel free to print these off. If you've got a child on the fence on something and you're wondering if you need to do some more support for them, take a look, put their name at the top of one of these, ask yourself these questions, check yes, no, not sure, use the guidelines, and hopefully this will be really helpful for you to think about they're having a problem with fluency. And just remember that every time that they're struggling with fluency, it means that they're struggling with comprehension as well. So you really have to put both of them together. You can't take them out in isolation from each other. So how can we build students' word recognition and automaticity so that they can focus most of their limited brain power that they have on comprehension? I have some strategies for you that I like to use that are really good to help build reading fluency. Not only can you do those tier one whole group fluency lessons and really define what fluency means and go over those characteristics, but these are just some day-to-day great strategies that you can use in guided reading, in whole group, in partners, in small groups, strategy groups, however you want to use them to help your students become stronger with their fluency and build their automaticity. The first one is echo reading. This is when the teacher reads a short section of text, like a paragraph or a sentence, and the student reads it back, or a group can read it back. This focuses on rereading with the same kind of fluency. So you encourage the students, hey, listen to me read this with the stress that I put on these words. I want you to read it back with the same stress or the same intonation that you're doing. So every time you do a lesson on stress, you can use the echo reading strategy with your whole group or with partners or in small groups to have them practice reading with those fluency skills. The second one is silent reading prep. This is when you have students read silently before they read aloud to prep for the strong reading fluency and expression. So you might do something like this in guided reading or in a strategy group. You might give them a quick little introduction and say, I want you all to read this page to yourself before we read it out loud. And this just gives the time for the kids to spend that little bit of brain power more on fluency so that when you do read it aloud together, they can focus on the comprehension more than they need to focus on the fluency. Third way of doing this is rereading. Rereading is always a great strategy to use pretty much all the time. You can have students reread a text 2 to 3 times, focusing on fluency and expression each time. Something I've done in the past with kids is I'll have them record themselves reading like a passage into a recorder or an app, and then they listen back and they have to take a colored pencil and circle all the words that they listened to that they read incorrectly. And then they'll read it again a second time, the same passage, and listen to it again and take a different colored marker and circle the words they read incorrectly and do it one more time. And usually by the third time, they have way less errors than they did the first time or the second time. So we talk about how rereading is really powerful and will help us to improve our fluency, which then in turn improves our comprehension because every time we read something, we learn more each time. We're adding meaning to what we're reading every time. Number 4, choral reading. This is reading aloud in unison with the whole class in a small group or with a partner too. So you can use this strategy to build students' confidence, their fluency, their stamina, and their reading motivation. So choral reading is where everyone reads out loud together. This is really good for emergent readers and also for readers who you're moving to a more challenging level and you want to kind of give them a little extra support to get them there. So reading aloud in unison takes that pressure off of having to decode each word and also kind of levels the playing field for everybody in the group that you're reading with and gives them an opportunity to focus a little bit more on the comprehension. Number 5 idea for you is shared reading. This is an interactive reading experience that occurs when students in the whole class or a small group join in the reading with a teacher. So this helps students to track their print on the page, observe what good reading fluency looks and sounds like, and builds their confidence as readers. So it's a shared experience. Readers theater is number 6. I love readers theaters. It's reading a script basically together with other readers. So the script is often adapted from a piece of literature, and each reader is assigned a part like a play. Readers theater is different than plays though, in that the script does not need to be memorized and there's no props that are needed. Readers theater scripts are fun to read, They reinforce rereading, and they lend themselves to an excellent way for students to practice reading fluency and get them excited about reading. Another one is poetry. I love having the kids explore poetry. It's the perfect genre to practice reading fluency because most poems offer a rhythm and a rhyme that's great for learning fluency. Rereading poetry in partnerships, small groups, and as a class is very fun too. Recording reading. I think I talked about this already, but I have them record themselves reading aloud into a recorder or a voice recorder app and have them play it back and use those colored pencils to test out how their recording sounds, how their reading sounds, not only looking for errors in words, but have them listen in for how they're sounding. How's their rate sounding? How's their stress and their tone going? How is their integration? How's all of those fluency characteristics sounding together as they're reading? Some whole group fluency lessons are really, really awesome to do. You can teach the 6 characteristics of fluency in a whole group mini lesson format. Be intentional in your instruction, model reading with fluency, and give students opportunities to practice, practice, practice reading fluency. So model, model, model. I love saying that together. Model, model, model. Any chance you have during the day, model good reading fluency, keeping in mind those 6 characteristics. Read chapter books aloud for fun. Read poetry and laugh together. Point out how the fluency impacts the meaning as you model and enjoy text together. And the last one is practice, practice, practice. Give students lots of opportunities to practice fluent reading, both orally and silently. The more time they spend reading, the stronger of readers they will become. So give them lots of opportunities to practice fluent reading. So why did you show up today is a big question. No, did you want to know intentional reading fluency instruction is necessary, or are you looking for ways to ensure students are getting enough support and practice with reading fluency? So how can you ensure that your students are getting enough support with reading fluency so they can attend to the meanings in the text? You can create your own whole group and small group lessons for each of the fluency characteristics I went over today, or you can grab the lessons that I have and ensure that you cover all the important reading fluency topics so they can build their reading stamina, increase their automaticity, and focus more on the meaning of the text. Do you need ready to go reading fluency lessons to help your students identify and practice reading fluency and become stronger readers? I do have reading fluency lessons for each of these characteristics. Now they're available separately, but in a bundle, they're discounted to $28. Now, because you're a lifetime member, you actually have a coupon code that will give you a 20% off discount. And that coupon code is Read with Fluency. So you can either pay for this all at once and put that coupon code in to get the discount, or you can actually do 2 payment plans too. So you can break it down into 2 months of payments and you'll have all the lessons right up front too. Just type in the Read with Fluency coupon code on Teachable. Now you have the link to this in this section of the lifetime access, and it's the Fluency bundle. Inside of it, you have tabs available if you like to get organized. There's covers for the bundle, there's covers for each set, and all kinds of ways that you can stay organized. I just print these on cardstock and laminate them, and then I hot glue them to clear binder pages, and I make my binder of all of my lessons for fluency, and you can use these year after year then. Inside for each of the characteristics, you have 5 lessons. Now, the first one, which I think is pausing, pretty sure it's pausing, you have 8 lessons. All the rest of them, you have 5. So it breaks it down. Not only are you breaking the idea of fluency down into 6 characteristics, for each of those characteristics, you have individualized lessons here that you can focus on. Each lesson comes with the mini lesson statement. It has teacher language that's all in red there for you and breaks down exactly what you can do during your mini lesson. These are 10-minute, 15-minute lesson tops. It has an anchor chart on the bottom for you to set up how to do a sample anchor chart. Gives you a little bit of teacher language to get you started. But again, these lessons are very actively involved by students, so you'll be filling in your anchor chart based on your students' responses. What's also really cool about these lessons is I have student note-taking pages for every lesson. So if you're doing a lesson, say this one is on dialogue and how the characters are thinking and feeling, you can give the students this note-taking page, have them glue it into their notebook where on the dotted line they can cut this out fits perfectly into a reader's notebook. And then they can take notes as you go through your anchor chart. It'll match perfectly with your anchor chart for the whole class. So the kids will have the learning all year long. I love, love, love this because you don't have to reteach the lesson necessarily. You can say, remember we were talking about rate a couple months ago? Let's turn in our notebooks to our notes about rate and review for a few minutes. And then boom, you've got the lesson right there in their notebooks all over again. Now, to practice these skills, you have a graphic organizer for every day too. So the kids can go off and work with this graphic organizer and talking about their fluency using any books that they're reading. So that you can use these graphic organizers during independent work time, during guided reading, as a homework assignment if you'd like. And they're able to be differentiated because it doesn't matter what book they're reading, they can respond to these based on the book that they're reading. You also have I Can table cards for reteaching. This is when the kids haven't seemed to, a few of the kids in your class haven't seemed to master the skill, and you want to do a small group, strategy group, real quick for the day or a couple days. So you can throw up an I Can statement, which if a coach or principal walks into your room, they know exactly what you're working on with that group. It's just a table card. I print these on cardstock and just fold them in half. And then on my side, I have 4 questions that I can ask related to that specific skill. So this one is I can pause and take a breath when I see commas as I'm reading. And then I ask them specific questions related to that skill. Why should we pause at commas? What might happen if we don't? Or if we do not notice commas, how can pausing at commas help you be a better reader? How do commas make a text easier to understand as you're reading? So you can ask these questions in relation to a book that you're working on with them and thinking specifically about commas. So you have this specific skill to work on as a reteaching idea. So you've got whole group instruction built in here. You've got them taking notes. You've got them practicing independently, and you have some reteaching. And then to top that all off, you have certificates for mastering these skills. So if they master these fluency skills, you can give them certificates. You can also give them brag tags that they can glue into the back of their notebooks, which they really love. And there are assessments too. I didn't have that part in here, but there are assessments for each one as well. So lifetime member friends, this is, if you're watching this as a really old replay, this is the summer of 2018. I'm going to be doing a live Q&A. We have a new Facebook group I just started not too long ago. You're probably in there, hopefully. If you're not, go check it out. There's a link to this Facebook group in the course, and you can ask to be added. I'm going to be live in that Facebook group each of these days doing a Q&A. So what's cool about this is if you are watching this and all of these are already over, you can go into the Facebook group and pull up the video section of that Facebook group and you can watch these as a replay. So if you want to have a live Q&A interaction where you actually get to see my face and you get to talk, you get to see what people are asking about each of these webinars, go back into the Facebook group and watch these replays of the live Q&As. It'll be really helpful for you. And if you are watching this in real time or near real time, show up to some of these live because I would love to see you in there too. Okay, so that's all I have for you in this webinar. I hope you enjoyed this information about fluency. Don't forget that coupon code is Read with Fluency, all one word, and that will give you the 20% off of the fluency bundle that gives you all of those lessons to teach those 6 characteristics of fluency to your class. I hope you enjoyed and enjoy the other webinars. Take your time going through again. You can watch this whenever you'd like. You can watch all the other webinars whenever you'd like to. They all have exclusive bonuses and certificates and coupon codes for discounts on bundles too. So I hope you enjoy and I look forward to seeing you in the Facebook group. Take care and I will talk to you again soon.